Hello. I wanted to go ahead and tell you just a little bit today about the guest for this podcast, and that is Jim White. I'm doing it before the regular introduction because our conversation was by phone and it just began after we had talked a few minutes and I just started asking him questions. Jim White is the son of one that some of you may know, the author, at least by his pen name, James Herriot. He wrote several books, that is, James Herriot wrote several books. His real name was Alfred Wight, but his books are known, especially in the UK, but also worldwide, as All Creatures Great and Small, All Things Bright and Beautiful, All Things Wise and Wonderful, and The Lord God Made Them All, of course, based on the hymn, All Things Bright and Beautiful. So, James Herriot, as an author, writes amazingly funny, poignant books about veterinarian life in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So, if you've not read those, it would be a great series of books for you to get. They can be a little bit on the adult side, nothing significant, but just a few words here and there and descriptions of what goes on with the animals, and especially in helping animals give birth, that you probably would want to change a few things if you read it to young kids. But we've read these books to our kids for years and they've always enjoyed them. But Jim White, the son, has written a book about his dad. His dad died in 1996. So he wrote about his dad, and it's a very kind, gracious, and honoring book about his father called The Real James Herriot. So we talk about his memories of his father, some of the elements of the book, and how life has changed in the United Kingdom since he himself, Jim White, the son, also began practicing in veterinary science. Hello, I'm Matt Carpenter, and this is the Good Life Podcast. So to begin with, you have a lot of really interesting facts, certainly about your father, your family, the town of Thirsk. But how did your dad develop in his writing gifts? Most people don't think of vets as being good writers. So where did he learn to write the way that he did?
I remember in the days when I was at school, I remember him buying books on teaching yourself to write. He was always wanting to write. In fact, he wanted to write a book from the days he was at school himself. And he practiced for ages, for years and years practicing. And eventually, of course, he had a lot of rejections of his book in the early 1960s and the mid-1960s. He had lots of rejections, but continued, he persevered. He showed determination and self-belief to get that first little book, which was called If Only They Could Talk, and that first little book published. It was a long, long process, a long, long learning curve, if you like. It turned out, of course, he was a tremendous writer at the end of it all.
Yes. But that's a good lesson for people who face rejection as they are pursuing things that they love, to remember that someone who's so well loved now would be turned down as he was early.
He showed those two qualities, I thought, at the time. If you want to be successful in life, you need determination. He didn't give up. And the other thing was self-belief. He used to say to me, look, if you think you're no good, you won't be any good. Never think you're no good. And he believed his book, even though it was rejected several times, he believed that book was good enough.
Yes. So, and now you've been for a long time a caretaker. In addition, I mean, you yourself were a vet for many years, and
Yes.
you were also a caretaker along with your sister of his work. So,
Yes.
what have you always lived in the town of Thirsk? Have you ever, lived anywhere else? And just tell us a little bit about that town that was the base of your father's work for so many years.
Yes, both my sister and I, of course, we were both born in Thirsk and brought up in Thirsk. And my father, he came to Thirsk in 1940 from the Scottish city of Glasgow. And he liked Thirsk so much, he fell in love with the place straight away. It's a nice town, good friendly people, the countryside is nice. And he just loved Thirsk. And that Thirsk, of course, is the fictional Darrowby. It is Thirsk. And sometimes when I read my father's books and I look about all the funny little doors and buildings and little alleyways and yards, I can just see Thirsk as it was then, just jumping out in front of me when I was a boy. Yes, I think there's no more I can say about that. It is the fictional Derby is really based upon Thirsk. But of course, he set his books up in the Yorkshire Dales, which are what I would say 20, 30, 40 miles west of Thirsk. And he set his books in the Yorkshire Dales for two reasons. Firstly, it's a nice romantic setting to put his stories in, because he wasn't really a Dales vet, he was a Thirsk vet, which isn't really in the Dales. And the other reason that he set his books in the Dales was he wanted to retain his anonymity. He didn't want to be discovered. He didn't want to be found out. That's all. He was like that, my father.
A very private man.
Of course, he was such a good writer that he shot himself in the foot because he was such a good writer. People knew who he was almost straight away.
Right. Well, one of his gifts certainly is his lovely depiction of the scenery. So that's something that we have always appreciated. In your book now, and I would, for the people who are listening, certainly, your book, The Real James Herriot, a memoir of my father, is a wonderful depiction that you wrote, as you say at the very beginning, to honor him. And you talk about in your book that he actually had multiple opportunities to leave Thirsk and pursue other work or work in other places. So what was it that drew him to remain where he was?
He never wanted to leave Thirsk. He had difficulty getting a partnership with Donald Sinclair, who was, of course, Siegfried. He never wanted to leave Thirsk. And indeed, he very nearly did leave, because he couldn't get he couldn't get a partnership. This is the problem. I guess it was a bit of a throw of the dice and a bit of chance, really, because he wanted to leave. He didn't want to leave, rather, but other vets that came to work for a while with Siegfried found him impossible to work with.
Right.
Lovely man, Donald Sinclair. Siegfried was a wonderful, lovely man, the real Siegfried.
Yes.
A lovely guy, but almost impossible to work with. And he was absolutely one of life's true characters. But very difficult to work with, but a lovely man. But these other fellows couldn't work with him, and of course, I think that Donald Sinclair, Siegfried himself, realized that he had a great chance of a fine partner in my father. And of course granted him a partnership, a full partnership back in 1949. A full partnership. But no, he never wanted to leave Thirsk. He loved Thirsk so much.
I actually have had I've had talks with friends here who have had situations with their employers that often reminded me of some of the stories your father tells about,
Yes.
Mr. Sinclair, who's depicted as Siegfried Farnan, and
Yes.
there's something there, and this is another element of great writers, is that they can take a character and in some cases, exaggerate that character's eccentricities. But as you say in the book, your father didn't exaggerate. He actually modified some of those eccentric qualities.
Yes. Yes, he did. I think some of the great qualities that my father had was he was very good with simple words.
Yes.
His books are so easy to read. And he always described himself, and I quote, as an amateur at the writing game. And he used to say to me, I write just simple stuff, simple stuff. But that's why his writing is so clever. It's the sort of word that he uses in the right place, in the right time, in the right context. That's why he was such a clever writer. Although he would never, if he was speaking now, he'd be a very modest man,
Yes.
He would never admit that he was a good writer. I remember him saying to me, one of his favourite writers was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes man,
Yes.
And he used to say to me, he used to read Conan Doyle over and over again. And he said to me, unwittingly one day, he said, that's the mark of a great writer. I said, what is, Dad? What is the mark of a great writer? He said, you can read his stories again and again and again. Well, James Herriot's like that.
Yes.
Many fans of James Herriot have read his books again and again and again. I think that's the mark of a great writer.
Yes.
You can enjoy them so much. Another thing about James Herriot that I think is so important is his books are about people, aren't they? Not animals, really.
Right.
They're great study of human nature. He was a great observer. He never missed a trick, He was a very, very good observer. And also, his books are about other people, not just himself.
Right.
The great characters in the books, like Siegfried, I've read a lot of other books written by vets, and they're all about the vet treating animals, almost like case books, really. Not Herriot. His books are about people, fundamentally, and not just about himself.
So, as a pastor, I'm a pastor to a number of people in our church,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the similarities, or the things that I have learned about about helping people from his writing are numerous. Because he did, as you say, and as he says in his books, he treated people, not just animals. He was a kind man to the people he's helping.
Yes, his great expression was also, he used to say to all his assistants, he used to say, it's not what you do, it's the way that you do it. It's so important. That's why he was well liked as a vet, showing those qualities of care, thoroughness, compassion, putting the welfare of the patient ahead of any profit.
Right.
He said it again and again, it's not what you do, it's the way you do it. I've said that in my book. I'm so pleased I wrote that book, actually, Mr. Carpenter, because other biographies came out about Herriot, and they were way off the mark. And I wanted to do something that would show the man as we knew him,
Yes.
the family man, the good man. And I remember before he died, he said to me, I don't want any biographies written of me. And I said, well, look, Dad, I'm sorry, but people are going to write biographies of you, as well as many articles about you. And then he said to me, if anybody wrote a biography, you should do it. And I said, well, how do you know I can write? I don't know that I can write. And he said, I don't care whether you can write or whether you can't. But I know you tell the truth. And that was a thing that drove me on, to tell the truth. And he said, that's what he said to me, you would tell the truth.
Well, and...
So that... carry on.
No, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but your writing carries a significant bit of, it reminds me in many ways of your father's. You know, you're giving biography, so you cannot embellish the way your father would or combine characters together the way that he would, but you're understated at times British humor, which is one of my favorite parts of British humor. It's wonderful. I mean, it's really enjoyable to read. Your book reads like fiction, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean, it draws one to continue reading and enjoy and soak up what you're saying. So, are you still there?
Yeah, so I had no help with anybody, so I think a little bit of it must have rubbed off. So I think the idea was that they would let me get the facts, and then they would bring in a ghostwriter, you know?
Right.
And write it properly. And as I got into this book, I thought, no, I don't want a ghostwriter. I want to do it myself. And it was all my own stuff.
Well,
I ended up quite enjoying it, because I had a fascinating subject, really. James Herriot's a fascinating subject.
Yes.
As you know, of course.
Yes. So now, I did not realize, though, that your book is about 20-something years old at this point.
Yes, it was published in 1999.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very well received in Canada, but didn't climb much in the United States. And yet I got a lot of accolades from people in the United States, but it wasn't promoted terribly well, I don't think. Not that worried me. I'm not out to make a huge profit, you know.
Right.
But it certainly is, of all the biographies of Herriot, it's the one that is true, of course.
Right, yes. Well,
that's the important thing for me.
Yes. One of the people who is often overlooked in, when they read the stories, not because she's ignored, but just because that people read about your dad, and that is your mom. Because throughout the books, he's always he speaks of her very highly, but she is supportive, gracious, helpful, and wise. How did she do all of these things?
Well, she was. She was the one that really encouraged him to start seriously writing the book. And one of the things he used to say was it was his silver wedding. He'd been married for 25 years. He was talking about writing a book. And she told him, it's 25 years gone by since we got married. You've been talking about it for 25 years. You haven't even started yet. And so she was the one that really got him going. And she was very supportive, indeed. She was a good wife to him throughout their life, She didn't interfere, but she used to read his scripts and this sort of thing. But she kept herself in the background. She wasn't dominant, but she was a very, very supportive wife and a great mother to Rosie and I, the kids, as well. We were fortunate indeed,
Yes.
Having good parents. So many of my friends and people that I know in this country, it could be the same over there in the States, I'm sure, but some kids have such a bad start in life. And Rosie and I were very fortunate having parents like my dad and mom.
Yes.
Fantastic, really. My father was he's a great father. I always thought that my definition of a good parent is someone who has time to spend with their kids.
Mm.
And he was always busy, my mum was always busy, but they always had time for us. That was the great thing that I remember, you know. We always, and at the beginning, to start with, he had very little money, as I wrote in my book. He was skint, really, had very little money. And throughout our time at school, he didn't have any spare money. But we never knew that. We were never aware of that. Never. Yeah, we were fortunate. I've been born with a silver spoon in my mouth, really.
Yes, yes. Well, and
I always think that.
your gratitude comes through in the book. And
Yes, yes.
and something that I also enjoyed reading both in your father's books and in your book is your family's appreciation for hospitality and good food.
Yes.
There was the description of, I mean, as an American, I've never had a pork pie before, but after reading about them so much, it's made me hungry for one. And I will tell you this, I enjoy cooking also. So your father's description of Yorkshire pudding was so tempting that I actually, one evening we had beef stew and then we actually made Yorkshire pudding to go with our beef stew that night. So
Was it good?
it turned out well. It was very light. You know, I'm sure it can be improved upon, but your parents' givenness to hospitality and showing kindness with food, that's a lost art today among many.
Yes. Yeah, we were always extremely well looked after and well fed. Talk about pork pies. Yorkshire here is the home of the pork pie, you know, really.
Okay.
It's wonderful pork pies in Yorkshire. Fantastic pork pies. I must say I enjoyed the times I went over to the United States when I spoke about James Herriot. 2 or 3 times I've been over. I've enjoyed the food in the States as well.
Well, good.
Great hospitality over in the States as well. Very, very warm, hospitable people. I've really enjoyed myself.
Good.
And as a father said, as you realise in my book, he only went over twice to the States, and he didn't go again. He found it very exhausting, travelling from one place to another. It wasn't so bad for me because I wasn't the celebrity that he was.
Right.
So I wasn't overwhelmed like he was.
Sure.
And of course I spent my time, my visits were through invitations from veterinarians. So I was among my soulmates, as it were.
Yes.
My dad was thrust among the media. And there's a bit of a difference there, you know.
Right.
But, I really did enjoy myself. I spoke at the graduation to Philadelphia.
Okay.
Faculty at the Penn State, Pennsylvania. God, that was fantastic. And among a lot of veterinary students. Thoroughly enjoyed it, you know. And I did say to them at the end of my address, and I think this is important, I said to them, you're going into a profession, a wonderful profession which will have a lot of ups and downs. You'll have a lifetime of triumphs and disasters. And you'll have a lot of downers. And I said, I had downers, and so did my father. James Herriot himself had downers. But I did say to them, his books are so uplifting, I said to them, if ever you do feel down, pick up a James Herriot book and read a couple of chapters.
Yes.
It'll make you feel better.
Yes.
Herriot's books make you feel better.
They do.
A lot of people countless people have written to us about how my dad's books helped them through bad times. Because they're full of goodness to other people, aren't they, really?
Yes. And
The main thing that when I was a young vet reading his books, though, the main thing was the humour.
Right.
I used to laugh and laugh and laugh. And he had lunch with the Queen, you know, here. He was invited to. I think I wrote that in my book. Anyway.
Right. Yes.
But I know that she said his was the only books that made her repeatedly laugh out loud.
Well, for
They're
me,
like that, aren't they?
no. For me, it is your dad and also P.G. Wodehouse are
Oh, yes.
the two. And I know you actually said that Wodehouse writing was some that he was an author your dad enjoyed as well.
Oh, he was. One of his favourites. One of his favourites. And his reading my dad's diaries when he was a boy, my father's boyhood diaries. A lot of Wodehouse-like phrases in his diaries.
Yes.
Oh, he had a profound effect. My father read P.G. Wodehouse right until he died. He was reading Wodehouse. Yeah, he loved Wodehouse.
Well, and one of the things about reading Wodehouse that I do appreciate, with P.G. Wodehouse, it's always the 1920s, and
yes,
the setting does not change. And in your father's books, and also in your book as well, there is a conservative outlook presented. And I don't say that in a political fashion, because the books are not political, but there is a desire to conserve what is good and true and beautiful.
yes.
And that's just a lovely description in your work and in your dad's.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes, he was a man with a lot of... I must admit, my father was a man with a lot of... He wasn't a regular church-goer at all, but he was a man with a lot of Christian values. One of the most important things I remember about him was he was terribly selfless. He would always seem to put other people's welfare in front of his own. I do remember that very, very vividly about him. One of his great qualities. And also a completely and totally honest man. I never heard anybody say a bad word about him. And Donald Sinclair was the same. Siegfried was the same. He was a man, as I said before, would drive you crazy to work with. But an honest man,
Right. Yes.
And a character without realizing. If you said to Donald Sinclair, you're an interesting character, he'd just blow his top. What do you mean I'm an interesting character, he'd say. Are you making out I'm some sort of eccentric? He had no idea.
Right.
No idea at all of his own eccentricities. He once came up to me one day, he said, "Do you like sardines, Jim?" I said, "Yes, I do like sardines." And he gave me a couple of tins. And I said, "Thank you very much, Donald." And he said, "Don't forget to turn them." I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "Turn them. They're in oil. And you must turn your sardines to make sure the oil goes uniformly all over the fish." And I said, "Oh, yes." And I said, he thought this was normal behaviour. Anyway, I rang him months later because I wanted some advice on a horse. He was good with horses. I wanted some advice. And his wife, who was Auntie Audrey to me, he was Uncle Donald to me because he was my godfather. And she said, "Jim, yes, you'd like to speak to Donald. I'm sorry you got him at an inopportune moment. Could you ring him back? He's turning his sardines."
Oh my. Oh boy.
So never interrupt a man who's turning his sardines.
That's right. I will remember
He
that.
used to buy them in great batches. He used to buy 30 or 40 tins at a time, And because he loved sardines. I think he was a man ahead of his time, Mr. Carpenter. A man ahead of his time because he said that fish oil is good for you. Well, we all know now that they're always telling us that fish oil is very good for us.
Yes.
There you go.
That is
What
true.
a character.
Well,
What a wonderful character. And, I said to my father towards the end of the end of his partnership, he was driving me crazy because he wouldn't retire, He was very old but wouldn't retire. And I said to my dad, "How have you stood this man? How could you stand working with this man for 50 years? And my dad looked at me and said, "What a wonderful character for my books." Where would I have found a man like that? And also, he said, there's one thing about Donald. He said, I knew, he said, from the first moment I met him that he would never stab me in the back. In other words, Donald was up front. You got what you saw with the man. There was nothing underhand about Donald Sinclair. And that's what my father appreciated. So, wonderful characters. They're still sadly missed around here. Father and Siegfried, both of them.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, how much, you talk in your book about how a lot of things have changed. You know, has Thirsk been able to retain very much of its former nature, or has it just continued along the lines of, you know, urbanizing like other places?
Oh yes, I'm afraid it has got. It's expanded enormously. There's lots of housing estates been built up all around about Thirsk. The practice has changed. The veterinary practice has changed completely. It has been taken over by a bigger organization. And it does no farm work at all now. It does purely small animal. The pets, it just does nothing but small animal work. We used to have 80 dairy herds in the practice when I...
Well, that would be a wonderful experience. What we've actually discussed at times, so we've never been out of North America before. And my wife and I have talked about coming over, because she said she would love to see the beauty of the Dales, and also to see Thirsk and the area around there.
Yes, the Yorkshire Dale, wonderful. You'd never forget it if you saw them. They've got a quality of all of their own. He loved them, of course. He regarded the Dales as well as Thirsk really as his home. And when we were kids, he was always taking us up there. Always taking us there. So if ever you come across, you know, do let me know, because we can give you some guided tours.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So are there any particular memories of your dad that stand out the most to you?
Sorry, any particular memories of...
Like just anything of your dad that you treasure the most when you think of him?
Well, I think of him. I think one of the memories I treasure most about my father was that we were such good friends. When you consider that father and son work in the same practice, there's never a wrong word between us. That's the sort of man that he was. And I suppose I'm an easygoing man as well, in my own way.
Yes.
But we got on so well together. And although he's been dead now 27 years plus, he's a man that I still miss. Because he certainly was my best mate, really. And he was terrifically supportive to us, to my sister and to myself. And the memories are that we had a very similar sense of humor. We used to laugh together. We used to go to football matches together. We used to go walking together. You know, there was always... He was the sort of man there was never a dull moment with. He was good company. And these are the memories I have of him, certainly. It's just all-round an excellent, upfront guy, really. You know.
Well, I know that there's a...
Much more than that?
Oh, well, yes. I know that there's a museum there, you know, in Thirsk, and the world of James Herriot, and
it's doing extremely well now too.
Yes, I'm sure that the television series has helped.
Tremendously.
So, have you been pleased overall with how the series is depicting the books?
Well, the new series, of course, the new one. Have you seen the new one, the most recent one?
Yes.
Well, of course, you will realise very well, being a James Herriot fan yourself, you will realise that you're not watching the writing of James Herriot. It's based upon James Herriot.
Yes.
Rather than sticking closely to his work. Unlike the original series in the late 70s and 80s, which stuck to adhered to his writing, this one isn't. But it's doing very well, and I do think it's brilliantly acted. We've met the actors and the actresses involved, and the producers and the directors, and I think it does capture the ethos of James Herriot's work at that time, and
yes,
veterinary practice in the 1940s. I think it does capture it. So we're pretty pleased with it. We realise this, that nowadays, for some reason, don't ask me why, Mr. Cooper, I'm no expert, but people take the work of writers and they divert away from the actual stories that the writer's written. We look at things like the Poirot from Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie didn't write a lot of that stuff that we see on the television screen.
Right.
The James Bond films, Ian Fleming didn't write that stuff. That's on. And just as now, James Herriot hasn't written a lot of the stuff that you see now. Personally, I think it's a bit of a shame. But maybe I'm living in the past, I don't know. But it's very good. We are pleased with it. We are pleased with it.
Certainly, yes. I mean, it does capture as you said, the ethos of of his writing. But yes, there's also something lost when the actual stories are not maintained. I know as well.
Yes, but it can be difficult, can't it? Really, it can be difficult to transpose the humour, the written humour of Herriot, onto the screen.
Yes.
Some of the humour that when I laugh at my dad's books, it's the way that he's written something.
Yes.
And that can be difficult to turn onto the screen. I can understand that. So some of the real humour of Herriot is difficult to put onto the screen sometimes. I realise that. And I keep saying, again and again, people say, oh, well, they love the original series as well, and they like the new series. And I say, hey, the best things are the books, though.
Yes.
They're the best. The books are the best.
Yes, we've actually worn out some of our copies and have had to purchase new ones because the old, even our kids will read them on their own, and so they will, we go through them. So I really appreciate you taking time to talk, though. This has been really fascinating and enjoyable.
Not at all.
If you have not read them, I would suggest please get all the James Herriot books, All Creatures Great and Small, All Things Bright and Beautiful, All Things Wise and Wonderful, and The Lord God Made Them All. And then get Mr. Jim White's book, The Real James Herriot, a memoir of my father. It is a fascinating, real study and loving tribute of a son to a father that epitomizes fulfilling the fifth commandment. Thank you all for joining, and I look forward to talking with you next time.